The expression back of Bourke has entered Australian folklore. You see, Bourke, which is a 10-hour drive north of Sydney, is where farming ends and the great Australian outback begins. Many locals refer to back of Bourke as Whoop Whoop or the Never Never. Ahead, we explore the Never Never, reminders of the days of rabbit trappers. Paddle wheelers on the mighty Darling, rounding up the lambs. The two Tims take us to the Yarra Valley in Victoria, a flight-by hot air balloon, one of Australia's most impressive wildlife sanctuaries, and a rub-down therapy in red wine. And our marathon road trip from Sydney across the outback finally reaches the top-end destination of Darwin. Welcome to Bourke, gateway to the outback, home these days to 2,500 people. A century and a half ago, this was a thriving port, with a big fleet of paddle wheelers working their way up the river to here. 100 years ago, Bourke was the biggest port in the world for wool, and to get that wool out of Bourke, down the Darling River to faraway South Australia, they used a fleet of paddle steamers.
Oh Captain, we'll soon be a wreck. To the river's dark bosom each seaman will go. But the captain laughed loudly with his yo-heave-o-yo.
Where once 100 paddle wheelers at a time could be seen on the Darling River here at Bourke, these days there's only one, the Jandra. This is a replica of the original Jandra, which plied the Darling River around 1895. The modern Jandra carries tourists on a pleasant one-hour trip in the cooler months of the year, with Bourke resident Julie Mahoney, the first woman on the Darling to get her paddle boat captain's licence. There's something beautifully romantic about being on a paddle wheeler.
Oh yes, it is. It's just so quiet and relaxed. We have so many people fall asleep on this boat. It's just really, really funny.
But not you as the skipper?
Oh no, definitely not. My husband calls me have a chat. I stay awake for the whole time. I never go to sleep. I just absolutely love being on the boat.
Now we know that Bourke was the biggest port for wool in the world in its time, in its day. That must have been a very, very busy, active time.
Yeah, Bourke created the record. In one season they shipped out something in the vicinity of 70,000 bales of wool, and in those days there was something like 12 million sheep running around Bourke district, so yeah, kept everyone quite busy. Apparently there's around 100 or so paddle boats and barges plying their trade up and down the Darling.
Would have been some sight.
Ah, would have been awesome. I'd love to go back in time and do the trip up and down the Darling. Train came to Bourke in 1885, so that was the beginning of the end of paddle boats in Bourke, although there was a few that still hung around here for a little while. The last one that came to Bourke was the J.G. Arnold in 1931.
Step ashore and you're greeted with a brand new high-tech exhibition dedicated to the back of Bourke. The legendary Australian poet Henry Lawson once wrote that if you know Bourke, you certainly know Australia. Well, that's the spirit of this place. The back of Bourke exhibit, a brand new $7 million centre that is just back of Bourke. With its lofty sails, it's been called the Opera House of the West. Supervising the exhibit's completion is Bourke Council's Phil Johnston.
This was really the core of Australia. This is where the unions were forming, the shearers were in action, and it's the real story of Australia. Not quite the Wild West, although some certainly felt that way at the time. It was the end of the line in some respects. 1885, the railway coming to Bourke meant that we had a lot of characters like Henry Lawson way back then coming out to Bourke because this was the end of the line. So I guess in some ways it was the dropping off point for the Wild West.
Inside, the exhibit features a series of video presentations from the Spin Effects Group, flashing back to the rich history of the region.
The Darling River. They call it the second Mississippi here. Can you believe it?
There's interactive displays where you get to be photographed and transposed onto historic timelines. Video showreels of the people of yesteryear. And clips that show the rich life of the Darling River and its paddle boats.